We're going to do something really daring tonight, and we'll see if it actually works. We're going to actually use some boards, some math that I haven't even actually seen the final numbers on. We were working on them actually over the weekend in regards to President Biden's State of the Union, and then with them dropping their budget. And we're trying to make the math work, which seems to be the routine here. So I have a lot of boards. The theme is actually really simple on a couple conceptual levels. Okay, so the president basically said, hey, the Medicare Trust Fund, we're going to do something about it. Great. 7 years or so from now, the Medicare Trust Fund is emptied. But the Medicare Trust Fund is really, we often refer to it as the Part A. There's actually a couple slivers of it. Is about a third. It's just the hospital portion. The rest comes out of the general fund. But did you notice how the president stood right there, basically said, you're not allowed to talk about Social Security. You're not allowed to talk about reforming it. You're not allowed to talk about the fact that in 8 or 9 years, it's gone. And the amount of that dwarfs dramatically the scale of the shortfall of Medicare. But understand, you got the Transportation Trust Fund, it's going empty. You got the Medicare Part A, and then the big kahuna is Social Security, and those all happen within the next 9 years. And the intense frustration of the president's speech is, once again, it was a campaign speech, and it got to talk to the voters out there. Are you for sale? Because you were promised lots of things with your own money. So here's the reality. We're going to borrow the money, or we're going to raise the taxes. I'm going to show you the tax calculations are a complete fraud. We're going to buy your votes with your own money, and then we're going to borrow a boatload of the spending that's going to crush your retirement and crush your kids and your grandkids. Yay, go America. All right, once again, we're back to sort of setting records. If you actually subscribe to my daily debt, we send out a text message every single day with what's going on. And we don't make, it's not our opinion, it's right off the Treasury's website. We just grab it and we give you the two numbers so you actually understand it. We say, hey, for this fiscal year, because remember, we play some games at the end of the fiscal year on the timing effect where, like they did last year, where they rolled back the money from the Supreme Court ruling in regards to student loans, but they rolled it back in to push down the total number because they had done it up the previous fiscal year. There's all sorts of games. But we also give you one which it's just a running clock. It's the 365, this year, 366-day clock. And it just runs, and you get to see both of them. And right now, if you tell the truth and use the gross number, because we pay interest to the trust funds, and we're functionally the only industrialized country in the world that lies on this, where we borrow our own money, we pay it interest, and then we pretend, well, that's off the books. It's why if you look at OECD, they actually have the United States now closer to 144% of debt to GDP, because they don't allow accounting games like we do internally. We're borrowing over $95,000 a second. If you actually look at the run rate right now, last 365 days, or 366 if you throw in the leap year, we've borrowed over $3 trillion. I'm trying to find a nice way to emphasize that word. $3 trillion in the running last year. And I think I have it in one of my charts here, but if I don't, I'll just say it right now. When the president published their budget, is anyone paying attention how the game is working? We're starting to understand the game. So several months ago, when the preliminary budget numbers were put out by the White House, hey, we're going to borrow $1.5 trillion, 1.6, wink, wink, nod, nod. The number came out, what was it, yesterday? Earlier today. Says, well, it looks like we're closer to 2.1, 2.2. But if you then look at the rest of their math, it's going up higher than that. It looks like actually, if you actually do the gross, it really is going over the $2,800,000,000,000. Do we do this to lie to the bond markets or each other, or is it just so the idiot class, in Washington basically quotes the old number? But does anyone understand when you see movements of numbers that are functionally $1 trillion? The burn rate right now is we're borrowing $1 trillion about every 125 days. Does that get anyone's attention? So we're going to walk through a number of these slides, and then when we get down to the end here, forgive me for moving these, we're going to actually do some slides trying to take a look at the president's budget they dropped just a few hours ago, and our base math. So I'm going to run through many of these really quickly because there was a number of things said during the President's State of the Union address that were just bizarre. They're urban folk legend, but as we've seen in this town, if you say a lie enough times, it starts to become baseline political discussion. What happened after the TCJA? That's the tax reform that happened in December 2017. And there's two reasons for doing this. I want to show that the vast majority of where the tax cuts were for the working middle class, and that the U.S. tax code got more progressive. The wealthy, the top tiers, the top actually couple tiers in the United States of income, today pay a higher percentage of the federal income tax than they did before 2017. And I probably should say this now so I don't forget it. I believe there's a scam. So often we go home and we have people that they meet you at, you're at the grocery store, you're at Walmart, Costco, whatever, someone comes up to you, and they have the latest conspiracy theory. Or the number of times these things are just filled with them. I'll give you one, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's math. If you take the president's speech and say, we're going to tax rich people. Remember, I've come to this floor multiple times and shown you what happens when you do tax maximization of those over $400,000, and you can't even close anything close. You get about 1.5% of GDP. This year, we're basically borrowing, 9.6% of the GDP? Does anyone do some basic math, see the difference? We got a problem. But it's great political rhetoric, both on the right and the left, because we're a populous country now. Tax the rich people. Great. Doesn't get you anywhere near where you need to be. So when we get near the end of this decade, Social Security trust fund's empty, transportation trust fund's empty. If the president got his way, we've tax maximized just to cover the shortfall in the Medicare trust fund. Where do you get the money? I will lay a marker down today. By the end of this decade, this country will have a VAT tax, a value-added tax, just like the rest of the industrialized world, just like Europe, just like everyone else. And at that moment, the working middle class, that hardworking middle class, will be poorer. And that's the scam that's going on, because that's where the money is. And so you have this dancing, and it works politically. Think about this. As the wealthier and better educated have moved more to the Democrat Party, working people have moved to the Republican Party. Depending on who's in power at the end of this decade, be prepared. If you don't make some of these policy changes that change the cost of healthcare, there's no mathematical way you make it out of this decade without kicking the working class in the heads. And that's what's going on. So let's walk through some of this. Okay. So over here, you got to understand one of the key things that happened when we did tax reform. You functionally took half of the society, half the working people in this country. Now they're poor working people, understand, but half of them pay almost no income taxes. Okay? But you get over here to that top 1%, and yeah, they had a huge tax cut. They went from 26.8 to 25.6. But we also removed a whole bunch of other deductions, and we're going to talk about that. So it's always amusing here when you have our brothers and sisters from high tax states saying, we want SALT. because it goes mostly to really rich people and they write us checks. So we're going to blaze through these because we got a lot to do tonight. Did this last week, want to make the point, this number is now wrong. Our estimate is we're going to have interest this year, this fiscal year of $1.1 trillion. $1.1 trillion of interest in the 2024 fiscal year means Social Security is number one spend at $1.45 trillion. Interest will be number two. Medicare will be number three. Defense is now number four. You all heard that in the president's speech, right? And I keep trying to make the point over and over and over that it's not just those of us who think it's more ethical to do gross interest. If you even do net interest. Now, that means you pretend you didn't pay any interest to Social Security Trust Fund, Medicare Trust Fund, Transportation Trust Fund, Railroad Retirement Trust Fund, all the others. You just say, you borrowed the money, you didn't pay anything. We're just going to keep that off the books. Just the interest you pay out to those people who bought U.S. debt, bonds, T-bills, notes. That's still the second highest spend. But that would be inconvenient to go out and tell the truth, wouldn't it?